This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
Good morning. It's 3 minutes after 10, and I do hope you're well. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where I find myself both relieved and sort of sadly pleased, if that's a phrase that makes sense, by the fact that we opened yesterday's programme talking about intergenerational trauma and what society can do to acknowledge the very real and visceral, even existential fear of Jewish people at all times, never mind at a time of such conflict and confusion. Because I had a conversation yesterday with a former editor of a national newspaper, and he said something that hadn't occurred to me previously. He just said, "God, we're awful, aren't we? The way that we make it about ourselves." And I thought, gosh, yes. The speed with which we move away from covering the actual carnage, whether on October the 7th or subsequently, of course, in Gaza, October the 7th in Israel and subsequently in Gaza, and we start talking about journalism or politics. We just make it domestic, not necessarily self-centred, but we make it domestic. And it occurred to me that it would be very hard, wouldn't it, to identify how much of the fact that we're talking more about Suella Braverman than we are about dead Palestinians is down to Suella Braverman and how much of it is down to us. I'm not going to lie to you. I would rather talk about having an absolutely despicable Home Secretary than I would talk about a terrorist atrocity in Israel or the continuing carnage in Gaza. So it's simply because of the psychic toll that it takes, the emotional toll that it takes. But it is odd, isn't it? I think that a lot of the responsibility lies with Suella Braverman because of the ecosystem in which she operates. And by that I mean that she knows what is going to happen when she uses the phrase hate marches to describe essentially peaceful protests, but not entirely peaceful protests, and then doubles down on it in full knowledge of how offensive it is and how inaccurate it is. In the same way that she knew exactly what she was doing when this daughter of Kenyan and Mauritian immigrants described immigration as a hurricane and pledged to do whatever it takes to protect our borders. She's currently done next to nothing. I think that when she described multiculturalism as having failed, she knew exactly to whom she was appealing and exactly what she was doing. So whether it is right or wrong that the political media public triangle will focus and leap upon these comments and these interventions with either disgust or, in the case of approximately 16% of the population and 80% of the British media, with hand-rubbing glee, the point is that she knows that is what will happen when she does it. The lifestyle choice on homelessness was perhaps the weirdest of these interventions. I don't think that we routinely consider homeless people to be completely deserving of our ire and our fury and our disapproval, especially at this time of year when we reflect upon the disproportionate number of military veterans who find themselves sleeping on the streets. The numbers are not as high as some of the as I have previously believed. When you dig into it, it's not quite the national disgrace that it could be described as, although it remains a national disgrace. And Suella Braverman elected to describe former servicemen sleeping on the streets as having made a lifestyle choice, because that's the phrase she used to describe everybody sleeping on the streets. It subsequently emerged that she's probably softening you up there for an exponential increase in the number of refugees and asylum seekers sleeping on the streets, because the 28-day grace they currently have to find accommodation after having to leave government-funded accommodation is about to be reduced to 7 days. So charities fear, the same charities that Suella Braverman wanted to fine for giving tents to homeless people, charities fear that the simple logistics of finding places for these people to live will fail, will be overcome. And if they are rendered homeless, then Suella Braverman lies awake at night when she's not dreaming about deporting genuine refugees to a country that has a recent history of shooting refugees dead. She lies there awake worrying that some of these homeless foreigners might actually get tents to sleep in. And that really, really keeps her awake. She hates that. She lies there sort of clenched, all clenched. Her teeth are grinding. God, there's going to be some homeless foreigners but they might get tense. Makes her blood boil. And so the question of, how much of the responsibility for the news focusing on the Home Secretary instead of on, either the situation in the Middle East or some of the problems, some of the bigger problems, some of the broader problems facing the country is one for the ages. We'll have a quick look at the poppies. Most of the very, very right-wing client media, the kind of outfits that were so far up Boris Johnson's backside you could only see their ankles, they've gone very, very quiet about the poor fellow, the confused fellow in Edinburgh, who thought that he'd been attacked by a screeching mob of Palestinian protesters screaming anti-Semitic slogans. The police have reviewed the footage and indeed spoken to the eyewitnesses and presumably to him as well. And it appears now that his foot was trodden on by a child, which, I'm sure it hurt, but for the Daily Mail to get one, if not two, front pages out of that, and for most of the client media to be treating it as if it was World War III, I think it's very important to acknowledge that they don't ever admit they made a mistake. They never backtrack or apologise. They simply don't mention it. They simply move on to the latest exaggeration or embellishment, which today, of course, creates the frankly extraordinary sight of the Daily Telegraph carrying the following headline. This is what happens when truth has left the building. The Defence Secretary has called for poppy sellers to be fully protected, as police said they had no reason to believe volunteers were at risk of being targeted by protesters. I'll translate that for you into reality, and it is, despite the best efforts of right-wing newspapers and commentators to pretend that poppy sellers were either under threat or facing attack by people protesting against the bombardment of Gaza, there is no risk whatsoever. But the Defence Secretary can see the political capital. It's Grant Shapps, in case you find it hard to keep up. The Defence Secretary thinks there are a few brownie points to be won from the client media and the profoundly dishonest reporters of non-existent attacks, so he is speaking as if there is a need for full protection. That's how bonkers everything is, and that is precisely the scenario that Suella Braverman sought to create. Precisely the scenario that Suella Braverman sought to create. There was not enough violence for her on the previous marches. There was not enough confrontation. There was not enough footage of people engaging in unsuitable behaviour. And trust me, the Times and the Sun and the Mail would have been down there desperately trying to find as much as possible. But there wasn't enough for her purposes. So she had to conjure up the idea, A, that they were all hate marchers, and subsequently her friends in the media creating the idea that poppy sellers, peaceful poppy sellers, I walked past some this morning at Glasgow Central Station, peaceful poppy sellers are somehow in danger as they go about their business. So what do you do with a problem like Suella? Her polling currently runs, her approval rating currently runs at approximately 16%. As a presenter of a radio phone-in host, I am possessed of an inbox that will be full of people claiming that it's actually 100%, the sort of people who used to phone me on a regular basis and then routinely soil themselves while talking about Brexit or Nigel Farage or Boris Johnson or Donald Trump. So we know that the numbers are, they're not negligible. I've always said to you there's a 15 to 20% rump of voters in almost any liberal democracy who would not just be comfortable with the introduction of fascism, they would roll out the red carpet for it. And that 16% approval rating for Suella Braverman speaks directly to that statistic. So she's not conflating populism with popularity. These are profoundly disgusting pronouncements that she's made. Then there's her personal conduct. Of course, she asked civil servants for help after being issued with a speeding fine. I think that's probably a breach of ministerial code, even though Rishi Sunak declined to seek a formal investigation and independently concluded that she hadn't broken it. She was fired, of course, by Liz Truss. Even Liz Truss, I mean, crikey, there's a damning indictment of Rishi Sunak. Even Liz Truss found the strength, if that's the word to use, to fire Suella Braverman, in that case for breaching the ministerial code and then being very economical with the truth about the precise circumstances in which that breach of the ministerial code had happened. Nonetheless, 3 days later, Rishi Sunak gave her job back, and she has used that position to cause him untold grief and to pour unmeasurable amounts of petrol upon the embers and indeed the flames of division and disagreement that are once again threatening to engulf the country. So there are two questions. There are two questions, leaving aside, of course, the issue of why it is that she would want us to be talking about her at the moment rather than the situation in Israel and Palestine. Her every utterance is designed to draw attention to herself. What's she up to? Don't just say it's a leadership bid. That's not good enough anymore because she's drawing fire from Conservatives as much as anywhere else. I think it was Bob Neal, wasn't it, on with Andrew last night, with Andrew Marr on LBC, describing her comments in the strongest terms. There are reports that in Cabinet she is facing the disgust, let alone the disapproval of her colleagues. And yet the public support for these toxic positions, as we've seen, runs at about 16%. So what is she up to? 03456060973. And then I want you to put your thinking cap on, if you would. Because the second question is, in many ways, the trickier one. And therefore, perhaps the most interesting one. What should Rishi Sunak do? It might be that you can't answer the second question without answering the first question first. But Rishi Sunak, probably even more than Liz Truss, because I don't think most of us had any great expectations for Liz Truss. You think of the "it is a disgrace" and the comments about pork markets and all of the other profoundly odd interventions in public life. Once she was actually exposed to the light, it was pretty clear to everybody paying attention who hadn't had their brains boiled by Brexit that she was going to be utterly disastrous as Prime Minister. Nobody, I grant you, could have quite predicted just how disastrous and just how quickly that would become clear. But nobody looked at Liz Truss, apart from the Conservative Party membership that propelled her into Downing Street on a sort of tidal wave of Brexity flatulence. Nobody expected anything. Nobody sensible expected anything from Liz Truss. The comment writers on the Daily Telegraph did, but as I say, nobody vaguely sensible. The people who write Daily Mail front pages, they thought she'd be brilliant, but as I say, nobody vaguely sensible or honest expected anything from Liz Truss, but they did expect more from Rishi Sunak. Professionalism, accountability and integrity, which, do you know, incredibly, he still uses it as a catchphrase. I think it was just about allowable for 3.5 hours on the day that he became Prime Minister. And then, of course, the moment he put Suella Braverman back in the Home Office, any claim to professionalism, accountability or integrity began to look bogus. But to be using it now is just ridiculous. To be using it now is just funny, really. But for a while, we believed him. I thought, and by a while, I mean 3.5 hours, I thought that was actually him sort of shrugging off the ropes of his kidnappers. I thought he was going to try, and I think at the COVID inquiry he will, I think he was going to try to portray himself as a hostage almost of Boris Johnson, as someone who decided it was better to be in the tent urinating out than to be outside the tent urinating in. So although he was clear about how awful Boris Johnson was, he took the view that it was better to be there in an attempt to moderate the awfulness than it was to be sniping from the sidelines. Better to be near the power than detached from it. And there would have been quite a powerful case for that. I think he could have made that argument up to the point that he reappointed Suella Braverman to the Home Office. So he is different. He has managed to arrive in Downing Street with hopes and expectations resting on his shoulders, even from people who would never vote for him or his party, even from centrists, possibly even from lefties. You just found Johnson and Truss so unutterably appalling that you thought a change might be as good as a rest. And yet here he is. Here he is, failing utterly to deal with a carbuncle in the cabinet, a disgusting and divisive politician who is coming pretty close to sounding like Donald Trump did in the run-up to the January the 6th attack on the Capitol. So what is she up to? 03456060973. And crucially, what should Rishi Sunak do? What should he do? I cautiously suggested that she wouldn't last the day yesterday because I couldn't see how he could continue to countenance this. And I was wrong. I didn't do it as a prediction on the radio, so you know, there's no need to get the other tin, the sorry I was wrong tin, which is full of cobwebs at the moment. But the suggestion to me from a colleague was that Sunak will wait until after the autumn statement and bring in some sort of reshuffle then. That might work. That might be an answer to the question. But that means Rishi Sunak wakes up every morning wondering what she's going to do today. It's like having an incontinent puppy. And you wake up in the morning wondering which room it's pooed in, because you know it will have pooed somewhere. And, of course, what you should do is either lock it in the kitchen or get it down the trainers quickly. What should Rishi Sunak do with the incontinent puppy of British politics that is currently Home Secretary? And those are your two questions. It's just coming up to 10:20. What is Suella Braverman actually doing? And it has to be a sensible answer. You can't just say it's a leadership bid. You have to explain how that works. 03456060973. And what should Rishi Sunak do? What effect is this having on him? What is Suella Braverman's continuing incontinence doing to Rishi Sunak's reputation, premiership, and sort of the perceptions of his strength and or weakness? It's 19 minutes after 10.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
22 minutes after 10, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It wasn't just Braverman, James. Sunak also put Raab and Gavin Williamson back into the cabinet. You know, you're absolutely right. It's almost as if you've read the introduction to the fourth best-selling book in the country by making that observation, because Raab and Braverman in particular are arguably the best exemplars of how broken politics was when Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister. The fact that they could rise to high office, much higher office than Nadine Dorries or Jacob Rees-Mogg. They're sort of like the pantomime characters. They're the ugly sisters, if you like, of the political pantomime that we're all living in at the moment. But Raab and Braverman were much more sinister characters, all as thick as mince, of course, all four of them. But the fact that Sunak put those two in the cabinet is significant, and those three in the cabinet, but Raab and Braverman in particular, and of course one of them's still there. So what is she doing, and what's Rishi Sunak playing at? Sarah's in Liverpool to kick things off. Sarah, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello.
Well, from watching this debacle, otherwise known as British politics, for the last year or so, since Rishi's got in, the reason why she's behaving the way she does is at heart she's a destructionist. She might be a barrister, she might be a KC.
She wasn't a barrister. Was she a barrister? Was she a solicitor? She was a barrister. I think she automatically becomes a KC by dint of being Attorney General for a while.
Maybe. But
it definitely wasn't awarded for services to the legal industry. I'm prepared to. That's a fight I'm prepared to have.
Well, I can understand why, judging what comes out of her mouth. She doesn't understand law. But by the by.
Yes, by the by.
She, at heart, as a politician, you have two camps. You've got those who construct and rebuild the country, the constructionists. And unfortunately, Boris Johnson, not Boris Johnson, well, she's in the same camp as him.
Well, he's not a destructionist, is he, though? He's just an idiot.
He's a buffoon.
Yes, exactly. He's just a blundering, narcissistic fool. He doesn't deliberately destroy things unless he thinks it would do him good in the short term, whereas she seems to see it as an end in itself rather than a means to an end.
What she wants to do is destroy whatever she comes into contact with.
Why?
Well, that's what destructionists are. It's like asking why does a psychopath do what they do?
Well, is it? I mean, but... So inside her head somewhere, there must be an answer to the question of why do you want to destroy this? Why do you want... And you're right, because whether it's the European...
She's doing it for there's two reasons why. A, power base.
Yeah.
B, her ego. Look what I've done. That's it. You can boil it down to those two
Why
things.
did you do that? Because I can.
That's it. I can do that. It's like 5-year-olds when they break things. Why did you do that? Because I can. Yeah. She hasn't quite grown up yet.
Why did you hit your sister?
Yeah, a bit like my brother in my case.
Yes.
But the reason why they do it is so they can have their little, especially in politics or in business, they have everybody at each other's throats. That's what destructionists do. Think back to his lordship, Barnard Castle.
Yes.
Is a creature. Dominic Cummings.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Think
he
about
did
him.
that,
He was doing
like a state of perpetual animosity, perpetual war.
Yeah, that's what she wants. And when destructionists have people at each other's throats, be it in the workplace, in a family, or in this case in the country, and nobody's noticing, and if anyone's noticing, great. But if people aren't noticing, then that's when they decide to take over in power.
So the more unstable everything is, the bigger the opportunity for someone to sort of waltz in and take over becomes. But it's not exactly working, is it?
No, it isn't. But that's what you see. This is why she might be, in theory, intelligent, but
I don't think anybody's accused her. I don't think anyone's ever accused her of being intelligent.
Well, I said in theory.
Yeah. All right.
She's got a law degree, so she must have a brain somewhere. In theory. But this is what destructionists do. And so she's doing a very good job of it at the moment because she's got, 16% approval rating, more than Rishi Sunak in the party. Although God knows why.
That's the public at large. I don't know what the approval rating is in the party. But so that makes the second question even harder to answer. What should Rishi Sunak do?
If he had some guts about him, he would say, right, when she first overstepped the mark many, many, many months ago, he should have said to her, right, you're out. You've overstepped. I gave you a chance.
After the speeding, probably, or I mean, more so than the immigration, the multiculturalism, or the homelessness comment.
Exactly, yeah.
And the hate march comment, he could give her a free pass on that. But this business with the police, with her trying to malign the police when her job is to protect them and look after them, and of course hold them to account, but to essentially indulge in really lazy tabloid lies about the police to claim that, the Sarah Everard vigil, which they handled appallingly, took place when they'd been told not to have a vigil. So to compare that to the policing of a perfectly legal and permitted march is just stupid. It appeals to very stupid people who are probably stoking a little bit of Islamophobia because of the conflation of the religion of Islam with support for the people of Palestine. So here's the thing. Here's the fly in the ointment of your analysis. A Conservative MP told the Daily Telegraph that her presence in the cabinet was, and I quote, the only thing stopping the right from going into open revolt.
Well, if Rishi Sunak is scared of the right of his party, then I don't mean to be funny, it shows that he is a very weak Prime Minister. I don't remember any other Prime Minister when one of their Secretaries of State decided to basically cause open warfare in the cabinet. And beyond,
remember, and beyond, because the right-wing media have accepted the invitation to, and I hate this phrase, it's the worst imaginable phrase this week, to weaponise the poppy.
That's it.
They've weaponised the poppy. They've tried to turn it into... Yesterday I heard people actually terrorising poppy sellers by claiming that they would be at risk when they were out selling poppies, and even arguing that that's why they weren't out selling poppies. I thought it was one of the saddest things I've ever read or heard, the idea that you'd not realise that you become so biased in your support of far-right politics that you've ended up terrorising poppy sellers.
This is it. And the thing is, if he had any guts about him, he would take on what any other Prime Minister would have done in the first place and say, you're out. You overstepped the mark by a country mile.
Unless he quietly agrees with her, which seems to me unlikely.
If he agrees with her, then he shouldn't be... Then it shows that... If he agrees with her and her views, then it shows that she is his mouthpiece. And that is not right if a Prime Minister hasn't got the courage of their conviction.
Well, it's a possibility. In fact, I'm glad that that's popped up. Let's add that to the mix. Do you think that Sunak might secretly agree with her? 03456060973. Sarah, thank you. We should probably add the words of 30p Leenock to this, who, well, you don't even need to check, do you? 30p Leenock has almost certainly told somebody that she's speaking for the silent majority and she's saying what everybody thinks. Bless him. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:35. Don't do counterfactuals that often, but I am looking at the front page of the English Daily Mail today, and come for Suella and you come for us all. is the Tory rights warning to Rishi amid fears he's thinking of sacking Home Secretary, which, of course, portrays the Tory right as being in favour of attacks upon homeless people, of attacks upon peace marchers, of support for people who routinely breach the ministerial code and try and enlist the civil service to help them deal with their speeding tickets. I mean, it's a bit unfair, perhaps, on some members of the Tory right, but, you know, if the Daily Mail's sticking it on the front page, it must be true. It's only the other day that they were describing Liz Truss's budget as the best in generations. Finally, a true Tory budget, they said. So you can't fault their thinking, can you? Is there a case for arguing? So we've just portrayed Sunak as potentially being quietly in agreement with Suella Braverman's disgusting positions on many issues, but alternatively, perhaps he's repelled by them, but is actually taking one for the party. Is there a threat to the actual Tory party if he sacks this? Well, I can't see it myself. And also, it means that he's once again dancing to the tune of the lunatic fringe of the lunatic fringe of the lunatic fringe of his party. The sort of Marc Francois wing. I don't hear his name as much as we used to, do we? I suppose we should be thankful for small mercies. But the people who sort of did for Theresa May, and the people who then ultimately turned on Boris Johnson, the people who refused to believe that if they couldn't just twist the dial a little or tap their heels together or cross their fingers a little bit harder, the unicorns would have arrived by now. I can't quite see an existential threat to the Tory party, but who knows? 10:36 is the time. What's Suella Braverman up to? And what should Rishi Sunak do about it? Richard's in Shrewsbury. Richard, what would you like to say?
Hiya. I think Suella Braverman is ensuring that she has a career for a long time with or without the Conservative Party.
In politics?
Yes, well,
right.
In politics, in being a talking head, in, you know, being
because I think that some of this behaviour, the more toxic the behaviour is, the more it looks. I mean, she's got a big majority. She's not really at risk, even if there's a massive landslide. But when you see a Tory behaving abominably, you do think it might be an audition tape for GBBs, don't you?
Absolutely. I think it's very much the Farage route, isn't it? He was never elected as an MP. He ran parties which weren't particularly successful in terms of being political parties, but he's made an awful lot of money, and he is on TV. I mean,
about to start eating ostrich anuses in the jungle, if reports are to be believed. I don't think he's a good example because, as you say, he was never in the Tory party. But Rees Mogg has got himself a gig. 30p Leanock has got himself a gig. The bosses are hemorrhaging £30 million a year on that place, so they're not in it for commercial reasons or traditional business reasons. They're trying, perhaps, to define the direction of the next iteration of the Conservative Party. But I don't know that I agree with you. I think she's politically ambitious. I don't think she's one of the ones looking for an off-ramp. And in that context, your answer doesn't really work. If she's politically ambitious, how does this trajectory translate into advancement?
Well, maybe she does want to run the Conservative Party. Maybe she does want to be the leader. She's put herself up for it before, hasn't she?
This is the path to the leadership. Go further, go nastier, go lower. And
you've got to do something to differentiate yourself from the current lead, haven't you? Because of the polls. So whatever Rishi is doing, it's not enough. It's not working.
Yeah.
So I think she. One thing you can say about her is that she's been very clear. She's not being vague, and you could say to a certain extent that both Rishi and Starmer are sometimes just a bit vague, aren't they?
Yes, no, she's clearly hideous. So there's no grey area. She's absolutely horrible. Yeah,
absolutely. And I also think she would be really popular on Fox. I think she would be massively popular in the States.
I'm not buying this theory yet. I will wait and see, and if I'm wrong, then I will get the cobweb-covered tin out and put 10p in it. But I don't think she's after a media career. I just don't. I don't know why. I can't. Well, I can't quite see it. She's so sort of odd in her delivery. It would be like Liz Truss trying to become a game show host. But if you're right, you'll be right. Second question, what should Sunak do? What should Sunak do, and why is he doing what he's doing?
Why he's doing what he's doing is because he's not very good at being Prime Minister.
What is he good at?
Well, he's probably quite good at numbers. I mean, you can argue about whether those numbers should have become policy, particularly with stuff like Eat Out to Help Out, which we're now seeing was against all advice.
Yes.
But there was logic to it mathematically. So he's probably quite good at sums. And he also is quite good at not saying incredibly stupid and controversial things every time someone puts a microphone in front of him, unlike his immediate predecessors. Yeah. But I never got the impression that he was particularly savvy. Not particularly
he's not very good at politics.
Or ruthless.
He's not very good at politics. It's a great mystery how he's ended up in this job, and I think he probably thinks that too.
Well, he's not going to be doing it for very long. He's a bit like a caretaker, isn't he?
Why did I come into politics again? I think he's friends with a former political editor of The Spectator who talked him into it. Why did you make me do this, James?
I think his in-laws will be over the moon that he's Prime Minister, and he's, that's enough for him.
Like a sort of badge, like something to get out at parties and show to your friends. Do you know, we've got a Prime Minister son-in-law. Yeah, a bit like the bloke that owns JCB keeping Boris Johnson in his garden. It's to show your rich friends. They've only got peacocks.
When he inevitably retires to the US, it's a great topic of conversation, isn't it?
And he'll have to tell people. They won't even know. He'll have to say, I used to be Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, And they'll go, really? That's fantastic. How long for? And he'll say 24 minutes.
So it's slightly longer than my predecessor.
I outlasted the lettuce. Or rather, I outlasted the lady that couldn't outlast the lettuce. Thank you, Richard. I have to say there is more support in my inbox for your media projections and predictions than I'm afraid that I gave you, but I stand by my scepticism. The other thing about her that's not very widely known, and I do pick up on this in How They Broke Britain, the fourth best-selling book in the country at the moment, just ahead of Arnold Schwarzenegger. And no, I'm not going to stop. I'm just going to I'm having one day, all right? Just one day of this, so because I'm almost tearful with relief and joy about how well this book has done, and therefore I am going to allow myself one day of boasting, and if you don't like it, then I'll be back to normal on Monday when I boast about it slightly less. I pick up on the fact that, there's so much stuff in the CVs of these people who flourished in post-Brexit Britain. There's so much stuff on their CVs that would have hindered, if not absolutely derailed, political careers in the past. And the Braverman one is, when you go to her CV, her real CV, looking for anything that might be construed as a positive. And remember that she would have been desperately searching around for positives herself when she wrote her CV. So you know how it is when you write CVs. You literally put down everything you've got, embellish stuff perhaps. You've got to be careful if you're seeking life in public, if you're seeking a position in public life. But you put everything on your CV that might make you look good. So on her Chambers profile, when she was a barrister, she wrote down that she had contributed to a book called Gambling for Local Authorities, Licensing, Planning and Generation, only back in 2007. This isn't long ago. And that was on her actual profile as a barrister. So when she became a politician, when she achieved a bit of prominence, when she rose from richly deserved obscurity and people started having a little look at her back catalogue, it was the Big Issue magazine that picked up on this claim on her barrister's profile. So, this is literally her shop window as a lawyer. And it claimed that she'd worked on this book by Philip Colvin KC. And the Big Issue rang up Philip Colvin KC and asked what her contribution to the book had been. And he said she didn't make one. She did not make a written or editorial contribution to the book. However, on one occasion, I asked her to do some photocopying for the book, which she did. So if you had been asked by me, in fact, I think it's possible that I might have asked Eleanor, the producer of this programme, to print something out for me while I was on air so I could use it on the radio, and then I would have popped it in my rucksack and taken it home to use it as a reference point when I was writing the new book. So Eleanor could, according to the Suella Braverman School of Honesty, she could claim that she had made a contribution to How They Broke Britain. Available now in all good bookshops. That's how honest she is. And that's what Sunak puts in the cabinet. And that's because the talent pool he gets to pick from post-Brexit and post-Boris Johnson was barely a puddle. So what's she up to and what should he do? We'll return to those questions and more after this.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 10:48. We should probably take a few more calls, wouldn't we? It is supposed to be a phone-in show. Rob's in Poole. What's going on, Rob?
Morning, James.
Hello.
I had the great pleasure of meeting you in Southampton last week.
Well, I had the great pleasure of meeting
you.
you in Southampton last week, Rob. So quit. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Braverman. She has me scratching my head, if I'm absolutely honest. I think certainly her ego and ambition far outweigh any intelligence or talent that she's got. It's a mystery to me why she's reached the point that she has in her career, but it's also unsurprising.
Yes, in the current iteration of the Tory party. I was just thinking about Lee Anderson, actually, which I don't recommend anybody does on a regular basis. But you're looking at what the party has become. So it moves away from Sir Nicholas Soames and David Gauke and Ken Clarke, and it moves towards 30p Leenock, and that's very much Suella Braverman's territory as well, isn't it?
100%. Yeah, it's I don't want to overuse the phrase "you couldn't make it up," but if someone had told me this 20 years ago, I just thought, no, you're cracking. You're cracking up thinking that.
All right, I mean, 25 years ago, when John Major was the leader of the party, it would have been even more unthinkable.
I've never voted Tory, but I'd have him back in a shot.
Yeah, I hear you. So what should Sunak do, and why is he doing what he is doing?
Well, another thing that has me scratching my head, James, is the fact that she must have something on him, because he's not a stupid man.
No.
He is good with numbers. He's certainly not cut out to be a prime minister. I think it would be doing a disservice to elite sixth form job experience people to say that he was any as good
I think
as them.
he increasingly looks like a man who would agree with you about that, Rob. I think that's almost sympathetic, isn't it? It's almost poignant. If it wasn't for the rungs that he'd scrambled up to get there and the people that he'd enabled and facilitated to get there, I could almost feel sorry for him.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think he'd be better off in one of his 12 houses around the world playing with other people's money again. That's what he's good at. But,
so why is he not doing it? Is there a fear of what would a rise on the right look like? I don't even know.
I can't imagine it would be scarier than it is at the moment.
No, maybe not. So split down the middle, hold the party together, weakness, cowardice, or whatever it may be. The simple question of why is Rishi Sunak making everything worse by neither offering a full-throated... that would, I suppose, involve admitting that he... So the thing he did yesterday... They let it be known that the attack upon the Metropolitan Police was not undertaken with the support of Downing Street. They wavered a bit, but it is very rare. I mean, it's almost as rare as a newspaper having to apologise for an article written by a Home Secretary that maligned one community in this country in a way that could be probably described as racist and certainly described as Islamophobic. But of course, the Mail on Sunday had to do that for Suella Braverman a few weeks ago. You need to ask yourself why you don't know this stuff, by the way, unless you listen to this programme. You have to ask yourself why people who are supposedly in the business of keeping you up to date with everything that's going on are not telling you stuff like that. Or, for example, stuff like the fact that there was no attack on a poppy seller at Edinburgh Station this week, despite whatever was on the front page of the Daily Mail. You need to wonder why people don't want you to have all the facts that you need to arrive at conclusions. But you look at Braverman now and you just sort of think, well, what would it take? What would she have to do? Haziq's in Stoke. Haziq, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I'm just I've been listening to this for the past few weeks now, starting with the sort of Israel Hamas conflict, moving off into sort of the comments that the Home Secretary's made. And, I echoed what the previous caller said, where you asked the question, why isn't Rishi Sunak doing anything, or what should he do? And, the only logical conclusion is that, she definitely has something on him.
We can't do this. This is conspiracy theory stuff. I know that you're two for two. It's two against one, but he can't. I mean, she's not. I think there was the one time I think that held some water was Gavin Williamson, because somebody else over promoted beyond the wit of man, beyond our ken. How could Gavin Williamson end up Secretary of State for Defence? And then he actually took a picture of himself with his little black book. And as Chief Whip, it's not any skill set of his own. As Chief Whip, all the dirt comes to him. And he released that picture at a time when it looked like someone was about to sack him. So with him, yes. But with her, come on.
Yeah, no, it is far-reaching. I understand that. I mean, when you take a look at stuff like this, she's already been sacked by Liz Truss. she
sounds like a football chant.
Well, there you go. I mean, when you ask the question, what should Sunak do?
Yes.
I mean, with any other Home Secretary, and with what Suella Braverman's done, it should be an investigation. It should, lead towards possibly disciplinary action, or even legal. There may be even legal considerations. When you're taking a look at this sort of issue, it's very sort of emotion comes into it a lot, because you've got both sides who will respond no matter what you do. So I think Sunak is in a very difficult position, because no matter what he does,
that's generous.
I mean, it's with anything, right? No matter what you do, you can't please everyone.
But he is Prime Minister. I mean, it's not like he's picking a school football team and he doesn't want to upset Simpkins Minor. He's Prime Minister.
Yeah, so he has to do something. And I am definitely not, condoning anything that she said or what he's doing. I think he needs to do more. I think that what she said is, deflammatory. I think that everything that she has said has actually put fear and Islamophobia back on the streets.
Well, she's created this environment. I know the Daily Mail and the Telegraph and the rest of them, and some people who do what I do for a living have helped enormously with all the nonsense about poppies in particular. But she has created an atmosphere of fear and intimidation because the marchers didn't, and she sort of wanted one, I think.
Yeah, and from what I understand, the marches aren't going anywhere near the Cenotaph.
And they're not happening on Remembrance Sunday.
Exactly. And, the organisers have said that they're going to bear this in mind, and they're going to be respectful.
And there's a 2-hour window between the relevant timings, between the armistice, on the 11 o'clock armistice commemoration and the beginning of the march. It's actually madness.
Exactly. And the way I see it, what is the point of an armistice? It's to call for a ceasefire. It's to, anyone who fought in the wars must understand that this needs to come to an end. No matter which side you stand on, innocent men, women and children are being killed on both sides.
Yes.
So for a Home Secretary who is responsible for the safety of this country to come out and say stuff like this to divide a nation is absolutely ridiculous.
It's extraordinary. And then, on top of that, to malign the police, claim that the maligning of the police had been cleared by Downing Street, and then have Downing Street telling journalists that it hadn't been signed off at all. I mean, how bad does it have to get before he finds some?
I thought the stuff that was coming out of the COVID inquiry was bad, but this has just sort of pushed it over the edge for me. I mean, the amount of Islamophobia that's been on the streets anyway is ridiculous. And
anti-Semitism. I annoy everybody when I do this. I annoy people who mention anti-Semitism when I say and Islamophobia, and I annoy people who mention Islamophobia when I say anti-Semitism. But the patron saint of this week's show is the two ladies. The lady who rang in on Monday to say that as a British Muslim, she doesn't think that she can ever be British enough, and the Jewish woman who rang in yesterday to say I feel exactly the same.
Yeah, no, I agree. And the only reason I pointed to Islamophobia first is because that's what I've experienced personally, firsthand.
Yes.
So, no, I completely agree that anti-Semitism and Islamophobia are on the rise in this country. And there shouldn't be a Home Secretary who is ultimately responsible for this to come down, or
thinking that one of them is preferable to the other, or that one of them is acceptable and one of them is not. You need to have a completely even-handed approach on these issues, because bigotry and or racism shouldn't involve an invitation to pick sides. But it's pretty clear that Suella Braverman does pick sides, at least according to Boris Johnson's former race advisor Samuel Kasumu, who described her as probably Islamophobic. What a mess. What a strange old business. Thank you, Hazik. Have a great weekend. Sarah's in Hampton. Sarah, what would you like to say?
I think that Sunak won't really be able to do anything with her, because she's very confident, she's very feisty, and I actually believe that she is not just speaking her mind, but a lot of the cabinet members as well. So I feel like within the Conservative Party, not everybody's on the same page. So already there's there's already division. So then if Rishi Sunak, he wants to, focus on the 5 pledges and then kind of push...
You're not allowed to mention the 5 pledges. Sorry, honestly, no. Do not mention the 5 pledges. Seriously, the Spanish Inquisition will come for you.
But the fact that he wants her to do the dirty work, I feel like, and maybe he agrees with her 100%, but he can't go against her either, because that's going against your own party and what they believe. And I don't say all of them agree with her, but some of them do. And she's very confident and she's very powerful. I feel like.
It's not working though, is it? Because she is being perceived. He is not being perceived. Or she is not being perceived as marching alongside Rishi Sunak. She's being perceived very much as a thorn in his side, as a problem. Even the people that like her will be casting her as a contrast to Rishi Sunak. So if he's hoping that she's going to keep the racist vote sweet while he gets on with the business of dealing with a slightly more responsible form of politics, that plan's not working.
It's not working, but I feel like it gets to a point where some actions are not retractable. So even if she goes, and even if she goes to, it gets to a point where, she does get fired, things have been done. How can I say it? The hole has been dug. So now we're going to go back to,
it's like a sunk cost fallacy almost, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Even if she goes,
what would you do? Just in a sentence. What would you do if you were Prime Minister? What would you do with Suella Braverman right now? Your call, your choice.
I wouldn't be able to do anything, so I would actually take the focus off her and try to focus more on what I'm doing, the positive things, again, the 5 pledges, blah, blah, blah.
You can't mention the 5 pledges because they're all going appallingly, or almost all of them are going. So that might be the bigger answer, actually. He can't do what you suggest, even though it makes perfect sense, both politically. He can't do what you suggest because that would involve having to find the things that he can actually boast about. Oh, what a tangled web they weave. Thank you, Sarah. It's 11 o'clock.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 3 minutes after 11, and you probably worked this out already if you haven't heard me tell you before, but we never really know for sure what we're going to do on the show. We usually have a fairly clear idea at what we're going to do at 10 o'clock, but of course that can sometimes change in the course of an interminable monologue. I find myself opening up new directions for us to explore together that I hadn't even appreciated the existence of when I opened my gob at 2 or 3 minutes after 10. And some days we change our mind, don't we, during the 10 o'clock news? I'll hear something in the bulletin and think, we should probably be talking about that instead. Yesterday I saw a tweet by the inimitable Lucy Easthope that made me change plans for the programme and open the entire show based upon something that she'd said about the importance of acknowledging intergenerational trauma and collective trauma for Jewish people in the context of the threat to Israel, or the perceived threat to Israel. And that remains very much in the forefront of my mind as I look at much of the coverage of these stories. And I understand the fear that people feel, regardless of whether the marches are violent or dangerous. You only need to hear one person shouting something unpleasant, something anti-Semitic, and you think that there are 100,000 people coming for you because they came for your ancestors. I do understand that, but it doesn't make it true. And yet it's so important to acknowledge and to be aware of it. Going by TV screens, I can't see her surviving much longer. It's just the momentum of the story usually causes a politician to bend. You can gloss over the speeding fines. You can either quietly agree with or gloss over the comments about multiculturalism, homelessness, immigration, hate marches. I felt that we reached a new low with Suella Braverman as a population, as a country. I felt that we reached a new low when she rejected a Holocaust survivor's polite request to moderate the language that she used to talk about refugees because it reminded the Holocaust survivor of how the Nazis who murdered her family used to speak about Jews. But no, not for Suella Braverman. That was not advice or not a polite request that she was prepared to take on board or respond to gracefully or decently. But I find myself doing something that I do 3 or 4 times a year now. And that is wondering what a traditional Conservative voter makes of what is going on, makes of what is happening. And I don't just mean the Home Secretary, I mean the apparently impotent Prime Minister. I mean a cabinet in which Grant Shapps, stroke Michael Green, stroke Sebastian Fox, stroke Corinne Stockworth. If you don't understand what that means, Grant Shapps was running get-rich-quick schemes under a false name 10 minutes ago and then lied about it when he became an MP. There's so much, you know, that if it had been a Labour politician or an SNP politician who had done it, the client media would be bringing it up again and again and again and again and again. How many times are we reminded of that time that Diane Abbott got her sums wrong in a studio with Nick or had a mojito on a train? We're constantly reminded of these misdemeanours and these missteps. Suella Braverman lied on her barrister's chambers CV about her involvement in a legal textbook. And the lie was only really brought to light when a journalist rang the bloke that wrote the book and asked her if she'd really helped him. And he said, no, she did some photocopying for me once. Grant Shapps was running get-rich-quick schemes on the internet using false names, even after he went into Parliament. And then he lied about it. But does it matter? Does it prevent him? Does it even press pause on a rise through what is left of the Conservative Party all the way to Secretary of State for Defence? Nope. And they're just two examples. So it was Sir Nicholas Soames earlier this week talking to Andrew Marr. It was Bob Neill last night, actually, who I think is a former deputy chairman of the party. He's certainly a prominent moderate backbencher. He describes it as all having gone badly wrong. You sense that politicians like that, the ones that have stayed in the party, which involves a degree of moral compromise, I think, at least not speaking out, even if you're doing it now, not speaking out when Johnson was riding roughshod over everything that we're supposed to hold dear in this country, not challenging Liz Truss when she was preparing to send the entire UK economy down the Swanee, not objecting, if you like, to Dominic Cummings culling your more moderate and sensible colleagues from the parliamentary party and standing by while truly disgusting individuals like Nadine Dorries and Jacob Rees-Mogg roll to cabinet status in the Conservative Party. I mean, you look perhaps at some of these people speaking out now and you say better late than never, whether they're speaking from within the party, the parliamentary party, or whether they've left it either under duress, in which case I think your position is honourable, or through retirement, in which case perhaps slightly less so. But it is a party that existed relatively recently. The question I'm asked most often on the book tour at the moment is, because the book I've written is called How They Broke Britain. So quite understandably, people ask me, how can we fix Britain? And do you know who I keep thinking of? I keep thinking of Amber Rudd, actually, because it was not that long ago that Amber Rudd resigned in an act of what I think was pretty much an individual ministerial responsibility. It feels like a different generation, doesn't it? It feels like a completely different era. Would you believe that it is just 4 years ago? Actually, that was her last resignation. That was when she resigned from Boris Johnson's government. When she resigned from Theresa May's government, that would be 6 years ago. Rudd 2 resignations by Amber Rudd. One, a resignation of genuine honour. When she described Boris Johnson's government of being in danger of imploding, she quit the cabinet and resigned the Conservative whip, saying she could not stand by while loyal moderate parties were purged from the party. Just think about that for a minute. Think about what has happened subsequently. Think about how right she was. Amber Rudd, resigning on a point of pure principle, not just from the cabinet, but from the parliamentary Conservative Party itself. I cannot stand by, she said, while loyal, moderate MPs were purged from the party. And of course, her previous resignation came after she accidentally misled the House after being given some false information by civil servants, some mistakes or mistaken information, it wasn't a deliberate misleading, about things that had gone on in the Home Office under Theresa May. So I look at Amber Rudd and both her resignations, and I think it's not that hard to turn the oil tanker around. It is not damage that is unrectifiable. It is not impossible to conceive of a move back to a time when cabinet ministers would resign on principle or resign when they had done something wrong, regardless of whether it was their fault or not. So the obvious counterpoint to that is Boris Johnson being told by his independent advisor on ministerial standards that Priti Patel was a massive bully, and Boris Johnson deciding to do nothing about it. So it happened really quickly, that breach. And it occasionally makes me wonder, and I love the phrase that Amber Rudd used to describe her colleagues who were being culled from the party for being honest and understanding things, a precursor to the promotion of MPs who were dishonest and understood nothing, like Tories and Rees-Mogg, who of course went to Balmoral to mislead the late Queen about the unlawful prorogation of Parliament. Those two words, loyal and moderate. Now, I appreciate that we are probably not best friends, although I think it's highly likely we get on better with each other than either of us would with the current iteration of the Tory party. But if you think of yourself, or have previously thought of yourself, as a loyal and moderate Tory, a loyal and moderate Conservative supporter, not a loyal and moderate Conservative MP. Well, actually, if you've previously thought of yourself as a loyal and moderate Conservative MP, you are also welcome. You are equally welcome. There's no special treatment on this programme for politicians and public figures, as you know. But if you think of yourself as a loyal and moderate Conservative supporter, or until very recently you thought of yourself as a loyal and moderate Conservative supporter, what do you make of this? I'm listening to a bit of Melanie at the moment. I don't know if you're familiar with Melanie. She was a big star in the 60s. She did the song upon which the Wurzels based I've Got a Brand New Combine Harvester. It was based on Melanie's I've Got a Brand New pair of roller skates and You've Got a Brand New Key. But Melanie has a beautiful song. I don't know whether she sang it originally, but she's the one I listened to. And she goes, "Look what they've done to my song, Ma." And I think it must refer to another act taking one of her tracks, possibly the Wurzels, taking I've Got a Brand New Pair of roller skates and turning it into some sort of travesty. Look what they've done to my song, Ma. Something you love and something you care for. And then somebody else comes along and picks it up and just spoils it. Despoils it, pollutes it, soils it almost. So I think of that song when I think of loyal, moderate Conservatives, which include quite a few of my friends. Look what they've done to your party, Ma. Look what they've done to your party. Tell me what you make of it. Because I think you might be the loneliest people in British politics. I mean, Keir Starmer is tacking to the centre ground, so you may find yourself some cover under his wing, but you are a Conservative in your bones, in your blood, in your heart. And yet the party as it currently stands is one which you cannot recognise, let alone support. So what have they done to your party? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Let's have a little listen to. When I said, "What have you done to my song, Ma?" that's the lyric from the Melanie track. I'm not referring to my esteemed colleague Andrew Marr, although it would almost have worked in the context of the clip I'm about to play you, because the loyal, moderate MP Bob Neill, who wasn't moderate enough to resign when Amber Rudd did in protest at what Boris Johnson was doing, but who remains an honourable man. We were on the same University Challenge team, would you believe? Not that long ago. But he was indeed last night speaking to our very own Marr. And here it is.
Can I ask you, first of all, whether you think that Suella Braverman's position as Home Secretary is now untenable?
Yes, I think it is. I think she's gone over the line. And I was wondering about that earlier today. I'd hoped she might not have done. But it's part of a history of ill judgment and loose words. And of all the jobs in government, Home Secretary is one of those where you have to be particularly careful. And what concerns me, Andrew, if I can put it this way, is, was it by accident that these loose words were used just before this highly sensitive demonstration, where, as Natasha said, it's very difficult to remove someone immediately? Is that actually playing a matter of significant national concern to your own advantage.
Conservative MP there really laying it out with regard to the Conservative Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. So if, like Bob Neal and many others, you have considered yourself previously to be a loyal, moderate Conservative, tell me how you feel about what's going on in your party. It's 11:16.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:19, and in a way it's a sort of tribute to Amber Rudd, former Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, and her two resignations, one over what you'd call individual ministerial responsibility when she took a bullet, if you like, as Home Secretary in April 2018 in connection with the Windrush deportation scandal. She returned to Cabinet as Work and Pension Secretary and was reappointed to that role by Boris Johnson and then resigned again, this time on an even purer point of principle. And it just reminds us all of what Conservative MPs used to look like. And I wonder why they don't anymore, and what you, as a loyal and moderate Conservative, make of it all. And this, unlike most topics we do on the programme, I can tell you now that the phones will not ring off the hook on this one. So if you're thinking of ringing in, then don't delay. Don't put it off. But you're more likely to get through than you are on pretty much any subject we've covered in the last 6 months. Scott's in Rayleigh. Scott, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. First time caller to your show. Feel like I'm going into the lion's den a little bit here.
No. We're all friends here, Scott.
I'm 38, so I'm a relatively, in my party, Conservative Party, relatively, or baby.
I think you might be the youngest.
Demographics.
You might be the youngest.
Anyway, the problem I've got, I've been a party candidate as well locally. I want to give something back to my local area. I'm from Essex, which is a Conservative heartland. And I'm in a very, very safe Conservative seat where I live. What I feel is going on at the moment, there needs to be a total clear out at the top. There is a complete disconnection, I feel, between the parliamentary party and when it comes down to local level. We, as always been since time immemorial, when local elections come round, we get a kicking on the doorstep due to national issues.
Yes.
I'd knocked on people's doors and they were having to go at me about parties in Downing Street. And I was telling me about your potholes, not your party.
Yes.
You know, and it
yeah, that's
really,
frustrating, isn't it? That's frustrating.
It is when we're on the ground floor and we're Conservatives and we're trying to do the best for our area, you know, and we're let down by the top of the party. I would clear the whole lot out of the top. Because the only one I feel that has any shred of credibility that I wouldn't mind running the show is Penny Mordaunt.
Interesting. She would at least stand up and fight, wouldn't she?
Well, exactly. I think she's got a bit of that Maggie grit in her.
Okay.
Obviously, not as extreme, but I feel that we need to come back more towards a one nation side.
Did you like Sunak for a bit at the start?
I liked Sunak during the pandemic because I thought that was a bold move by a chancellor to be as generous as that when it came to the situation. But then
very good left wing politics, that, Scott, wasn't it? State intervention and money for people that needed it.
Yeah, and I think there's always a time and a place for that. I think some of the best ideas you take from the left and you take from the right and you meet somewhere in the middle. I mean, I consider myself right of centre and a one nation Conservative, but I do think at the top is just so much. There's no credibility anymore at the top of this party at all.
When did it disappear? When for you? When did the last vestige of credibility leave the building?
I think it was a slow burner. It was a slow burner over the last 5 years, I would say.
Okay.
You know, I mean, I miss the days of John Major. I mean, that's how bad I think things have got.
You were barely born. I mean, what are you talking about? You were about 8.
but you know, sometimes it's gone all about personality rather than substance.
Yes, I mean, what would be the last thing you could point at as a really meaningful Conservative-driven, big C Conservative-driven nation-changing initiative. It would be really hard to come up. Or love him or loathe him, you can talk about what Tony Blair did with regard to homelessness figures or with regard to access to universities. What have they done in 13 years that you could point at with pride on the doorstep when trying to distract people from the potholes?
I mean, I feel I was a Brexiteer.
Okay.
Having the referendum, I would have said was a plus, but the way it's handled after that, no. So it's very difficult. And lots of us in the party feel homeless at the moment.
Yeah, I'm not. Well, you are homeless. You are. I might just because I'm very unkind, I might just remind everybody of Penny Mordaunt's conference speech, because I think that she is the person around whom people like you are going to congregate, but whether she should be or not is a question we won't find out until it happens. Scott, I just want to read you something, because I think you're right. I think that the Tory party, as in the support, is going to be largely where you are. But the membership could be slightly different. And the grassroots Conservatives apparently like Suella Braverman. Someone called John Stafford, who is involved in the Conservative Democratic Organisation and the Campaign for Conservative Democracy. I don't know what the difference is. It sounds like the People's Front of Judea and the Judeans People's Front, but he's in both of them, so he can't be a splitter. She said that, he said, I think that what she has said is probably agreed by 90% of Conservative Party members who are utterly frustrated at the wokeness of the government. What do you reckon?
I think that she is poison for this party. Even if you agree with her, anyone can understand that if you're going to win in politics, win in UK politics, you have to bring some or a lot of the centre ground with you. There is not enough support on the far right, just as much as there's not enough support on the far left. You have to take the centre ground, and the way she conducts herself and the things she says does nobody any favours if we've got any aspiration of remaining in power.
I think that's really well put. So it's a pleasure to talk to you, Scott. And
cheers, thank you, James.
Hang on, before you go, there's nothing there, was there? Nothing, no lion's den about that at all.
Well, maybe I'll just articulate myself well.
That's exactly what it is. That makes two of us. 26 minutes after 11. Thank you, Scott. So there it is. Politically homeless, moderate, to the right of centre, but moderate, loyal Conservative. Somebody who, perhaps up until the point even that Theresa May became Prime Minister, you could never conceive of not voting Conservative. Certainly up until the point when David Cameron became Prime Minister, or when David Cameron won in 2015, because Brexit would have, unlike Scott, Brexit would have changed quite a few people's relationship with their party, perhaps, either short-term or long-term. But right up until David Cameron's 2015 election victory, when he unexpectedly, and as it turned out for the country, disastrously beat Ed Miliband, you could not have conceived of A, not voting Conservative, and B, the party to which you were loyal turning into whatever it is that it's turned into. Peter is in Thirsk. Peter, how lovely to hear from you again. What would you like to say?
It's a shambles, James.
Yes, you're not winning any prizes for that, you realise.
My thoughts are always, if you and I were to have lunch at the White Horse Fish and Chips, we'd spend our time arguing about how much we agree with each other.
Yes, you're probably right.
And that sort of Conservative Party member. But the thing that concerns me is that everything seems to be through a litmus test of which side are you on in terms of what is called woke, of what is, the
do we know what that
outcome
means?
of Brexit.
Do we know what woke means, really?
I asked them your question, which is, can you tell me what that means? And they go all goldfish on you.
Yeah.
And the mouth is open, but nothing's coming out. But the other thing as well is 13 years in government and virtually nothing to show for it, to speak of, apart from the shambles that has turned out from the referendum. I'm not going to relitigate that, but my particular interests, law and order, this latest thing by probably the worst Home Secretary of my adult life.
And you say that as a former very senior police officer.
Yes, she has she has not just strayed into bringing politics into law enforcement. She's almost deliberately done it.
Yeah.
And she's done it on a completely false premise. You're probably not old enough to remember something called the Battle of the Beanfield in Wiltshire in 1985. I was there as an inspector. Stupidly, they arrested the entire New Age Traveller convoy.
Yes.
530-odd people. And that filled up every cell in the southwest of England. Do they really think the police can arrest everybody who's at a march in central London when there are thousands of them?
Yes.
And to blame them for not doing that, and there are hundreds who are carrying banners which might breach the law.
I just would add briefly that there was actually a public order case to answer for the Battle of the Beanfield arrests, whereas there simply wouldn't be, because of the changes in the law that had happened previously, whereas there simply wouldn't be for the march on Saturday. And I do remember it because Dale Vince was telling me about it recently in his episode of Full Disclosure, Peter. So,
really?
He was there. For him, it was a seminal moment in his political development.
I was there with a serial of people. And when the Chief Constable of Wiltshire said, we're going to arrest all of them, we were just astonished.
And you're seeing
I was
echoes
really
of that.
glad that my serial got deployed to a point where we didn't see anything that happened subsequently. It was a disgrace.
What does the way back look like for your party? Because I think you remain. Last time we spoke, you were certainly still active. You were still a member. What does the way back look like?
I think the entrists, and there has been a lot of entryism, have taken control, and the only cure is going to be a period of opposition.
Yes.
Because this cannot go on. This is an inadequate level of government for the nation. House building is dropping off because of they say, we've stopped top-down targets. What they've done is they've empowered local authorities to not build houses. Okay, so the population continues to grow for various reasons, not least of which we continue to have babies. And the houses just aren't being built. We're 100,000 short last year of the target that should have been achieved for the number of new homes. The law and order generally, so courts, policing, prisons, are a disgrace. If somebody, God forbid, somebody is seriously sexually assaulted today, she is unlikely to be in court much before the end of 2026.
And yet they're making headline-grabbing announcements about coming down harder on these sort of offenders. Peter, I just glanced at the clock.
I know you've got to go to the news.
Well, it's because you draw me in, you see. That's what happens. I lose track of time when you start talking, which is why I would enjoy a pint in the White Horse so much. But I am now very late for the news, and I just remind anyone joining us later that Peter speaks as a Conservative Party member and traditional supporter, what I would call a loyal, moderate Conservative, arguably the loneliest people in British politics for a generation. It's 11:32, and Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
I did enjoy talking to Scott in Rayleigh, but I think when he said that he liked Penny Mordaunt as a possible candidate to lead the Tory party back into a slightly more sensible place, and I said, well, at least she would stand and fight, I fear that it went right over his head.
Stand up and fight for the freedoms we have won. Against socialism, whether it is made of velvet or iron. Have courage and conviction, because when you do, you move our countrymen, our communities and capital of all kinds to our cause. Stand up and fight, because when you stand up and fight, the person beside you stands up and fights. And when our party stands up and fights, the nation stands up and fights. And when our nation stands up and fights, other nations stand up and fight. And they stand up and fight for the things upon which the entire progress of humanity depends. Freedom. That is what Conservatives do. That is what this nation does. Have courage. Bring hope. Stand up and fight. Stand up and fight. Thank you, conference.
Okay. That is, maybe it's a little bit unfair, but I don't know that I'd feel enormous confidence putting the future of the country in her hands. She seems a little bit, unhinged, I think. Not in a Suella Braverman or in a Dean Dorries way, but that was a little bit odd, wasn't it? Do you know what I think happened there? I haven't told you this before. I think she forgot her lines. I can't remember. I'm not watching the footage. I'm only listening to it. So this theory obviously falls apart if she's actually got notes in her hand. But I think she forgot her lines and she just started riffing on that stand up and fight thing. I was at school with a lad called Paddy, who was probably the finest actor I have ever shared a stage with. He didn't go into acting, sadly. We got back in touch a few years ago. He's in New York now. And he was just an astonishing actor. He played the fool in King Lear. And I can remember it now. He just had one of those people that was, you know the kind of actor I'm talking about. And the first play we were in together was Alice in Wonderland. I played the March Hare, he played the Mock Turtle, and he forgot his lines. And he just went off on, you know the Mock Turtle song? Will you walk a little faster, said a whiting to a snail. There's a porpoise close behind us and he's treading on my tail. See how eagerly the lobsters and the turtles all advance. They are waiting on the shingle. Will you come and join the dance? Now he forgot his lines. So he just went to the will you, won't you, will you, won't you, will you join the dance? And he just kept doing it again and again and again in slightly different ways. And to the astonishment of everybody else on stage, the audience absolutely loved it. It's almost like they worked out what was going on. And Paddy just kept saying, will you, won't you, will you, won't you, will you, won't you, won't you, will you, won't you join the dance? Until somebody, I think one of the teachers must have realised that he'd forgotten his lines. And came to the rescue. But it was because he'd forgotten his lines that he ended up going on this glorious riff, centering around just 3 or 4 words. Will you, won't you, will you, won't you, will you join the dance? Will you, won't you, will you, won't you join the dance? And I think that might be what happened to Penny Mordaunt during that speech. She had something in it about fighting. Stand up and fight that sounded quite good. And then it went all a bit weird about socialism in a velvet or an iron what? And stand up and fight. Have another listen to it before, Jim, I'll be with you imminently. Preston and Manchester up next. But just have another listen to it while contemplating the possibility that she might have actually forgotten her lines.
Stand up and fight for the freedoms we have won. Against socialism, whether it is made of velvet or iron. Have courage and conviction, because when you do, you move our countrymen, our communities and capital of all kinds to our cause. Stand up and fight, because when you stand up and fight, the person beside you stands up and fights. And when our party stands up and fights, the nation stands up and fights. And when our nation stands up and fights, other nations stand up and fight. And they stand up and fight for the things upon which the entire progress of humanity depends. Freedom. That is what Conservatives do. That is what this nation does. Have courage. Bring hope. Stand up and fight. Stand up and fight. Thank you, conference.
Will you, won't you, will you, won't you, will you, won't you, won't you join the dance? Will you, won't you, will you, won't you, will you join? You see? Anyway, that's my theory. Jim's in Preston. What's happened to your party, Jim?
Brexit, that's what's happened to my party. I will never, ever forgive them for it. Never. Never. And so last election in 2019, for the first time in my life, I voted nationally for Labour, even though Jeremy Corbyn was leading them, because I thought it might lead to a better relationship with the EU, possibly the customs union, and so on and so forth. So
more in hope, I think, than expectation.
More in hope. I'm well aware that Corbyn was not exactly in favour of the EU, but there are plenty of people in the Labour Party, the majority, I think, who are.
As we're seeing, yes.
That's why they will get my vote next time. I like Keir Starmer. Sorry, not Starmy.
Yeah. You can call him Starmy if you want. I don't know if it'll catch on, but I quite like Starmy. A good old Starmy, eh? You know where you are with Starmy.
I think I know where I am with him, and I respect what I approve of what he's been doing with the Labour Party. I feel for him in his current Israel-Palestine predicament. I hope that he manages to sort things out. But he and the Labour Party will get my vote next time. And I will only go back to the Conservatives when they change their tune on so many things.
What's happened to them? Not just Brexit, because after Brexit, they didn't have to go down well, maybe they did, but they probably didn't have to go down the path that they've gone down, did they?
I have a friend who is somewhere to the right of Genghis Khan, and we're still friends just about, although it's hard work at times. And many, many years before the Brexit vote, I became aware that more or less every time I met him, he used to live in the same town as me, but he doesn't now.
Right.
He would be going on and on and on about the evils of the EU.
Right.
And I listened to him and I thought, give over. And then it got worse and worse. He would start, this was the day before the internet, or social media, he would start giving me cuttings from different newspapers. And I think that he was representative of a swell of opinion inside the party, which literally hated the idea that Brussels were telling us what to do. Well, they weren't, of course, because we were voting for these things as part of a club.
And writing most of the laws as well in many cases. But hey-ho, that ship has sailed.
Exactly. And I think that he was representative of a broad swathe of opinion, which the Brexit situation tapped into and made those people who were really to the far to the right inside the Conservative Party feel empowered to go further. And well, that's my opinion anyway. And there it is. But
I think it's probably mine as well. Do you know, Jim, I think for the first time ever, you came close there to being the first person that I have ever told to move on from Brexit.
Yeah, well...
Only because I didn't realise you were leading up to the answer to the question that I'd asked, which was how come they've gone off in this direction. But it's because they have been completely emboldened by that victory to believe that more untrue things are true, I think. So if you can believe and indeed persuade the country that you should judge a law not by how effective or how fair it is, but by whether it might smell a bit French in a certain light or look a bit German, then, and if it does, we don't want that law. We don't care whether it's a good law or not, or a good regulation or a good protection. It smells a bit foreign because we made it with other people who weren't born here. Then that has created a new breed of conservative who almost Trumpian in their delusion, I would say.
Xenophobic in their delusion.
Yes. But what does the road back look like?
You know, I mean, and you say give over on Brexit. Well, listen.
I didn't really.
Listen, I've been listening to a certain Dominic Cummings on the news recently and his testimonies. And I always thought that he was a sort of an eminence grise behind the Brexit movement. And now I realise that not only was he that, he was also totally the wrong sort of person for anybody to have ever believed on the subject. And well, I'm going to vote Labour next time. That's all I'm going to say.
Fair enough. But I think we might go with Stormzy. What do you think about Stormzy?
I'm perfectly happy with his proper name, and I hope that I hope Labour win next time. And furthermore, I hope they get a second term. It won't be easy for them because they haven't got the money to splash around. That's needed splashing around. And I can imagine that there will be disappointment in some quarters. But to have a sane and sensible government, albeit one that is to a degree cash-strapped, is better than the current bunch.
Has to be, doesn't it? Beautifully put, Jim. Thank you. I really admire your clarity of expression. It is 11:47.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
Look what they've done to your party, Ma. How do you work it out? How do you make sense of it? What does the way back look like? Mohammed's in Hornchurch. Mohammed, what would you like to say?
Realistically, I mean, since the day I was 18 till I'm 60 now, I've retired, semi-retired.
Oh, it's all right for some.
And I always thought a plumber done a plumber's job and an electrician done the electrician's job. They were qualified to do their jobs.
Yes.
Well, we seem to have a Conservative Party have been put in leadership positions or positions of authority, but they don't seem to be qualified to what they're doing. They don't seem to know what they're saying or who they're talking to, feelings, and how to be diplomatic. Miss Sue Ellen I think she's made me so angry that I'm not going to vote for the Conservative Party until the top-ranked people change.
Have you always voted? Have you always voted for them since you were 18?
Yes, I've been a Conservative voter, business. I've even told my daughters when they go to the polling stations, look, if you come back saying that you voted for Labour or somebody else, you'll be thrown out of the house. But now my daughters are looking at me and saying, Dad, and I went, okay, we can all make mistakes.
Very healthy. What are the kind of key moments? Because there won't be one, will there? There's not one.
No. I mean, generally, from Boris Johnson onwards, I think one thing that we've all forgotten, that Mr. Sunak was never voted by us.
No.
We never voted him.
Nor was Liz Truss.
And I'm just wondering if he would have a chance in hell to get in if we did vote for somebody like him.
Well, we'll find out, won't we, probably next year. But to be fair, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak all became Prime Minister without a public vote. Some of them stayed Prime Minister after a public vote, May and Johnson, albeit that May's majority was hugely reduced, Johnson's was hugely increased. But the last four Prime Ministers have arrived in Downing Street as a consequence of Tory party infighting, not as a consequence of a national vote, a national ballot.
The right wing's got a lot more to say than the central part of the party, and it's been going down the middle. We seem to be going more right wing. I personally, honestly, I'm a Muslim. I disagree with what's happened in Israel. I think the whole thing is a shams, and we had a chance to fix it in 1964 or 65, and we all seem to be like going, it doesn't affect me, leave it.
Yes,
but that's not the point. The point is, look, when this nation is distorted and it's fighting with its own population regarding Muslims, Jewish, there should be sympathy from our Home Secretary, not trying to divide and conquer.
She's picked a side, hasn't she? She's picked a side. Not. I mean, obviously on the conflict in the Middle East, that's a little bit more nuanced. But she's picked a side on the question of Islamophobia, I think.
I think so, in the sense that she's gone more towards that side than look, hate marches, this marches, that marches. Doesn't really matter if people have got the right to demonstrate. And we seem to make 200,000, 100,000, 500,000 people turned up at a march. You arrested 23 people, 24 compared to the people that were arrested to the population of the marching, that's nothing.
There's a jigsaw piece that I'd missed. Thank you. Why did she attack the police and answer because there weren't enough arrests? I mean, no matter that means there weren't enough people behaving in a fashion that means they should have been arrested. She wanted more arrests. So she called them hate marchers because there wasn't enough hate. And she's attacked the police because there wasn't enough crime. That's what she's done this week. You've done it, Mohammed. You've nailed it. That's the final piece of the jigsaw.
One more thing.
Fill your boots, mate. You're on fire.
We don't have the right. She doesn't have the right to question a freely decision-making police officer who thinks we have a police force that is independent to the government. She has no right to bring him in and say, "You better answer to me. I'm going to screw your backside, boy." She has no right to say that. Or neither does Sunak has the right to say that.
No, and they're abnegating responsibility. You've covered a lot of ground there, and I'm grateful to you. But that final bit of the jigsaw just fell into place. It really did. Because Why does she call them hate marchers? Answer, because they weren't, but she needs her base to believe that they are. She needs little Tommy Ten Names to be getting his hooligans assembled wherever it is they're going to assemble, and she needs or the sort of Spectator columnists to be spitting flecks of spittle all over the place, but that you can't actually get it from the smallish but despicable number of people on the marches doing despicable things, the women with hang gliders on their back, or the people carrying anti-Semitic banners. There was not enough hate on that march, so she had to call them hate marchers. But then the mystery of why she turned on the police and called them biased, it's because there wasn't enough crime. So there weren't enough people that the police could arrest. So she's attacking the police for the fact that the marchers were neither hateful nor criminal enough. That's the end of my TED Talk. We haven't put anyone in Idiot's Corner today, so Jackie in St Helens, congratulations. James, I'm trying my best here not to switch you off. Offering Amber Rudd as an answer to the current government is absolutely ridiculous. You are obviously a Tory. 13 years is enough from the Tories. Enough. We need change. And you advocating another Tory is dangerous. Ah, there it is. I was wondering what had happened to boil your brains like that, Jackie, but you provide the answer in the last line. Just look what happened when you vilified Jeremy Corbyn. I think I'll pay you the compliment of taking some of what you've written seriously. I was mentioning Amber Rudd as an example of a Conservative politician in very recent memory who actually behaved honourably when she found herself either in trouble or unable to put up with the corruption, the moral corruption within her own party. She's not even an MP, Jackie. The idea that anyone would be suggesting her as a future leader of the Tory party is, well, it's a qualification for Idiot's Corner. And I try not to talk about the last leader of the Labour Party, because every time I do, I'll get 10 messages accusing me of being obsessed with him. But I'll tell you what happened when I described Jeremy Corbyn's unelectability, Jackie. He proved it. That's all. That's the end of my other TED Talk. Gary's in Manchester. Gary, last word on the sad decline. And it is sad for people who think we need decent democracy in a country. The sad decline of the current Tory party. What's happened?
Basically, the people they've elected as leaders. We've got a situation where the last decent leader that we had, Theresa May, she didn't get the backing of the people, and one of her cabinet ministers who resigned, who then went on to become leader, called Boris, he whipped up this hatred for her. I wouldn't say that's a strong word, hatred, but he whipped up this dislike for her amongst the supporters.
And it was deeply dishonest, because it was the negotiations with the European Union that he used as the wedge to get her out. But of course, as he then proved, what she had negotiated was arguably as good as it was going to get once those red lines had been drawn.
Absolutely. And the problem is, he ruined London when he was mayor. And then become unelected. Oh, God, yes.
I just glanced at the screen then to check where you were, because people keep telling me Sadiq Khan has ruined London, and now you're telling me Boris Johnson did. I live there, mate. It's great.
Well, I come from East London.
Well, I don't care. You're in Manchester. I live in London, and it's the best city in the world.
It is the best city in the world. But
so he didn't ruin it then?
He did. But the way he conducted himself in office.
Oh, he ruined the reputation, perhaps. No, he didn't ruin. London has not been ruined either by Boris Johnson or Sadiq Khan.
I've not mentioned Sadiq Khan.
No, I know you haven't, but lots of people do. I'm just saying, you can't say that Boris Johnson ruined London without me saying no, he didn't, and neither did Sadiq. Anyway, we digressed slightly. How do the Tories get back on track? By
electing honourable people into the position that they've got, and not these people that toady to the leaders, like Rees-Mogg, Nadine Dorris, and people like that who are ineffective.
Are you sure you're a lifelong Tory voter?
I've been following the Tories since I was 14 years old, when I agreed to help out one of the finest Conservatives I've ever met, who went on to become an MP and got knighted, and that was David Amos.
Gosh.
When he was standing for Conservative cancer in the London Borough of Newham. I met him, and I was invited to come along and help out by a friend of mine whose family was lifelong Conservatives. If I wasn't doing anything, could I help? And I did. And he was an honourable gentleman who made sure we was fed and watered, and personally thanked all of us for what we did. And that shaped my views on Conservatism. I've got a lot to be thankful for the Conservatives.
Lovely story, Gary. Thank you.
Because they allowed me to buy my house.
Yes.
But when they've done away with mortgage controls, and people forget that. And they've done a lot for us, but then things started to get worse as we've had successive governments, because they tend to lose their way and they forget what they're actually there for, to serve the people, not to serve their own means. And a good example of that is Cameron, that when he came out of office, the way he then, because
feathered
his
own nest, as it were. Feathered his own nest.
And people forget that, and you get elected to serve, not for your own benefit in later life.
That's
and
beautifully put, mate. That's really nicely put. And you made me late for the news, which is a compliment to the quality of your contribution. And just because I am such an equable and fair-minded fella, I would also point out Tony Blair has made a ton of money since he ceased being Prime Minister as well. So it's not a uniquely conservative malaise that you describe. Thank you, Gary. Stay safe. It's 12:01.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 4 minutes after 12, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we're going to turn our attention next, staying with politics. No apologies for that today. It's very much one of those periods, isn't it, where politics feels desperately important. But we're going to turn our attention to America. Interesting things are happening in America. It is, I think, probably best summarised as saying that Joe Biden's party has had a very good week, but Joe Biden remains very unpopular. I mean, almost spectacularly unpopular. The election night takeaways from 2 days ago indicate that abortion is going to play a very big role, perhaps, in the next presidential election. The repealing of Roe versus Wade remains very unpopular across the political divide. But Democrats they did, in fact, win several key elections, despite the fact that the week began with Joe Biden polling appallingly, pretty much the lowest approval rating that he's had in his presidency, 12 months ahead of a presidential election in which he will seek a second 4-year term unless something extraordinary happens. And the governor in Kentucky, Andy Beshear, was voted in Ohio. Another ballot measure to enshrine abortion rights in the state's constitution was passed. In Virginia, the Republican Governor Glenn Youngkin got a bit of a kicking because the Democrats reclaimed control of the state's legislature. There are big victories in Pennsylvania. All of this in the context of, or against a backdrop of, declining poll numbers for Biden, which is of interest to students of politics and people who understand the importance of the next presidential election in America. Donald Trump, self-confessed sex offender, on trial. I think there are 91 counts against him now. 91 counts. And the only way he survives is by constantly subverting truth, still claiming that he won an election that he lost, and he will claim that every single accusation against him is not just unfair but invented. I mean, it's reached sort of Doctor Who villain levels now of brain control almost. The people who are drawn to Donald Trump initially because he gave them permission to be publicly racist again, and later, subsequently, God knows how you still cling to this. His approval ratings are no better than Biden's. They're a point higher in the polling that I've seen. But it's Biden I want to talk about. And if I ask why is Biden so unpopular, if you are a Donald Trump supporter, then there's not much point in anybody listening to you. I mean, about anything, to be fair. But on this, I don't think that you're intelligent enough to understand why I'm asking the question. So if you want to start shouting about Hunter Biden's laptop, then just pretend I'm on the other end of the phone. Just go into the garden, pretend that you've dialed 03456060973 and start shouting about laptops and QAnon and MAGA or something, and then you get to vent your spleen, you get to get it all off your chest, and we don't have to listen to it. So I'm interested in people who understand American politics, people who are supportive generally perhaps of the Democrat Party or previous iterations of the Republican Party, because if the Tories have been corrupted, then God knows how you describe the decline of the Republican Party. Why is Joe Biden so unpopular? It can't just be his age. I want to know what possibly it is, but I want to know what is happening to the Democrat Party in America that sees the leader of it enjoying dismal poll ratings, while across various states, including swing states, they're doing really well. And it's not just these victories, it's not just the personal approval ratings, it's what we talked to Emily Maitlis about earlier this week. It's 5 or 6 of the key swing states are currently putting Donald Trump edging ahead of Joe Biden. So it's not his unpopularity in the beauty contest with Donald Trump that interests me most. It's his failure to engage support of people who support his party. Why do Democrats not want Joe Biden to run at the next election? Why is he failing to... Why are people either ignoring or failing to understand the successes that he has enjoyed in all sorts of areas? Doing a good job, if you like, delivering on the economy, delivering on Medicare, delivering on, inflation, Bidenomics, reinvesting in working class America, lowering the costs of essentials like energy and healthcare. These aren't opinions. This is counting. Infrastructure investment's gone up. Climate change is being addressed. Medicare drug prices are being negotiated. Insulin costs have been capped. There's quite a lot on this list that could traditionally translate into poll support. But it's not happening. Here's a good example. Reuters report well on this. A lifelong Democrat who voted for Biden in 2020, Andrea Singmaster, is hoping that someone else emerges to change the 2024 election. There's a Democrat long shot called Dean Phillips that she likes the look of. She is thankful for President Joe Biden. He helped secure funding to clean up a contaminated site in her Philadelphia suburb, and his efforts to crack down on Medicare drug prices will help family members financially manage arthritis and Crohn's disease. But she is not so thankful that Biden is running again. He turns 81 this month. We don't do ageism on this programme, really, but it's not just a number, is it? If someone is perceived as fragile or someone is perceived as frail, then it is the opposite, perhaps, of what you want to see from a person pursuing power, a person assuming leadership. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. There's one theory that American pollsters still rely on landlines. I don't know. I have absolutely no idea whether there's anything in this, but there is one theory that American pollsters still rely on landlines, and therefore, if you were to conduct your polling solely with people who either still have or even answer their landlines, then you're going to get a very, very skewed picture. But specific polling of younger voters who lean towards the Democrats paints a very troubling picture for people who recognise the urgency of keeping Donald Trump out of the White House, which is everybody really sensible and or decent. So what's happened? I honestly don't know. I can't quite pin down what it might be. Same age as Mick Jagger. Is that true? He must be older than Mick Jagger, mustn't he? That's Micah sent me that message. So that's the question. 0345 6060 973. Knowing what you know, watching what you watch. If you are American, if you spent time in America, if you watch American politics more closely than I do, then what explains Joe Biden's lingering unpopularity at a time when his performance as president by most traditional measures has been pretty good, and his platform of policies is provenly popular, and his party members outside of Washington, D.C. have secured pretty good results in the same week that polling in key swing states in advance of next year's presidential election painted a very, very, very troubling picture for him. I spoke to Emily Maitlis about this earlier in the week, and she was at pains to stress the importance of microeconomics, the importance of individual experiences. If you're paying more for your gas than you were when Donald Trump was president, you will link the two phenomena, and you will think that Joe Biden is somehow responsible for the cost of living being higher now than it was 5 years ago, and that Donald Trump was somehow responsible for the cost of living being lower 5 years ago than it is now. And that's clearly a very big piece of the jigsaw. But what it doesn't accommodate is the results that the Democrats have secured in the course of this week. You can't really make sense of that without talking exclusively and entirely about Joe Biden. The party has done well this week, and he's secured some of the worst polling of his presidency. Can you marry those two facts together? Can you knit together those two phenomena? The party's had a really good week, but the leader of it is at the lowest popularity levels, crucially, not just on approval, but in key swing states than he's ever had before. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973. And Jagger is currently 80 years old. Anthony points out, Mick Jagger was old, James, when you were young. When even you... What do you mean even? Why do you have to add even? What do you put even there for when even you were young? I've been told off this week by a few people who've come to my book signing, book launch events to stop describing myself as old. Because it's on the perfectly reasonable grounds that I'm not. Someone else has pointed out that Nigel Farage and Brad Pitt are the same age. So age really is in the eye of the beholder. And that might actually be a relevant observation to Joe Biden's growing unpopularity, or stubborn, perhaps, is a better word than growing. So how can it be that the policies are popular, the party is doing well, but the leader is having an absolute nightmare of it? And if you really are on the ball, how feasible is it that he doesn't run? 0345 6060 973. We'll go to Hugh and Kat first after the break, and after them, in the words of the old lottery adverts, it could be you.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:18, and it is you think British politics is confusing and a little bit messy. You ain't seen nothing yet. Have a look at America. Why is Biden so unpopular with people that would quite like to vote for the Democrats? Hugh's in Leeds. Sorry to keep you, Hugh. What would you like to say?
Hi there. How are you doing, James?
Very well, mate. How kind of you to ask. What's on your mind?
Well, I've just sat through a whole raft of adverts with various messaging. The last one ended up with a freezing guy telling me to buy Volkswagen cars.
Don't forget that these adverts pay my mortgage, so try not to be too negative.
I'm not going to leave you broke. Don't worry. But what it is messaging. So we have this massive machinery behind all of these political parties, heavily funded. I mean, the money that goes into it is huge. Donald Trump, I believe, has been, in my opinion, receiving messaging on how to perform from way before 2016. He's aligned himself with a group of people who are driving for conservative values in America. That machinery consists of.
They're not conservative values, but I know what you mean when you use that you use that phrase. But I do want to speak exclusively about Biden today. So just don't bring Trump into it unless we absolutely have to.
It segues into it. It segues into it quite nicely. So I'll jump a few sentences. So here we are with Trump out there, backed by this huge machinery, having captivated most of the voters.
No, I'm sorry, mate. I want to talk about people who want to vote Democrat, but don't like Biden. I'm not talking about people who like Trump. They're two very different constituencies.
Okay, so he's out there doing all of this messaging. Biden isn't. We're not really seeing Biden on the stage doing what this other guy is doing. So the perception of him is quite wrong. When he does put the messaging out, he does stammer a little bit. He does stutter a little bit. Sometimes his actions do look a little bit elderly.
But this was all true before the last election.
Well, I've noticed that he's actually it's a little bit.
You think he's got frailer? You think he's got frailer?
So. I think it shows. And
it might all come down to that, mightn't it? All down to the optics. Do you know that I only knew this when I visited his library, his presidential library. Roosevelt, FDR, kept the consequences of his childhood polio secret from the American electorate. He kind of he had special apparatus built. He even had a machine in his car that rolled his cigarettes because he could only really use one arm, and he obviously needed it to steer. It's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, optics are so important.
They really are.
Yeah,
they really
are.
I
think that's what is the Democrats are struggling right now. But I do think this will ratchet up come next year.
As in get worse.
Down to the election. Pardon?
As in get worse rather than better.
No, I think the optics will improve as they start to talk about the policies more, because he's a policies man, and basically he's doing a lot of important change in America.
So I think as they start to roll down towards the election, I think that the Democrats will perform a little bit better with the optics.
I mean, I would accept that the Democrats and Biden in the context of this conversation are two very different things, and that's the thing that intrigues me most. But yeah, you must be onto something. That must be a large part of it. Thank you, Hugh. Elaney picks up, I think, where you've left off, says he's unpopular because he's not headline grabbing and entertaining. He's fairly normal and just gets on with the job. Another mention of messaging and another contrast with Trump, but adding in that he doesn't claim victimhood all the time. America have married celebrity and politics and forgotten that it's actually good to have someone in power with experience. It's like we experienced with Johnson and Starmer. Johnson was the guy that people wanted to have a pint with, in quotes, but when it came down to policy, people are in favour of the Democrat politics, being pro-choice, etc., which is why they're winning the state-level elections. I'd love to call in, but I have a screaming 4-month-old. That's no way to talk about Donald Trump. Kat's in Lewisham. Kat, what would you like to say?
Hi.
Hello.
I'm an American, but I'm also British, and I've lived in London for half my life. I've previously from Chicago.
Okay.
I have a couple of thoughts. I worked on Kamala Harris's campaign when she was running for president. I supported Hillary Clinton as well, so I'm a Democrat.
Yeah.
And Biden wasn't my first choice, but once he became the nominee, you voted for him because what was your alternative? Right. So a thing that I specifically noticed during the Clinton campaign, but it's just continued, is that the media framing of all reporting on what Democrats do is always negative. It's always set up as Dems in disarray. It's always like there's an NY pitch bot on Twitter that's basically just Democrats win. Here's why that's bad for Democrats. Like it's
how has that happened? Because I mean, I think the numbers that Fox News do are tiny, and yet the influence that they have is enormous. But why would supposedly objective media have what you perceive to be a fairly obvious bias as well?
I think it's a subtle bias, but
yes,
I think it's also that overcompensation for
they're trying to prove
neutrality.
They're trying to prove they're not biased.
Yeah, it's just like when Trump was campaigning and we had that, and CNN was covering him and his piles of paper not doing anything instead of an active piece of news from, I think it was Obama or Clinton. I don't remember which one, but I mean, it's always, and Trump is, he's loud and he takes up a lot of air in the room. And he's so ridiculous.
Yeah.
But the other thing, the other issue, I think specifically with Biden, is that he has a stutter. So his presentation is always going to be he's going to speak more measured. He's going to be a little bit more perceived slower, but careful because he's trying to articulate himself.
Yeah.
And that there's a lot of bad faith where they're like, oh, look at him, he's so old. It's like, no, he
is very old.
He's not. Yeah, so were a lot of people. Like Mitch McConnell, for example, has had actual space outs.
Full-on freezes.
Yeah, but, he doesn't get anywhere near the same level of, attack or criticism for that.
So it's every single potential piece of evidence gets blown beyond all recognition by all media, not just anti-Biden media.
Well, I mean, Trump has made it a joke, therefore it's always going to come up. I mean, it's ableist, but I mean, we can see that he's very healthy. He's very active. Cognitively, he seems absolutely fine, but, no one's going to know except his doctor, truly.
Yes.
But he's getting a lot of work done, and he's not there, he's not out being really flashy and look at me about it because he's getting the job done.
Is it reversible? Because what you describe is all contingent upon things that are not going to get better.
Yeah, I think it is reversible because, currently I think part of the reason why his polling is so bad is because of America and its relationship with Israel.
Yeah.
And there is also a really annoying habit of a lot of Democrats kind of treating the presidency as Santa, and if they don't get everything they want, that they're going to stomp their feet about it.
Yeah.
So rather than focus on the things that they've got and the progress that's been made, they're always looking at the thing that we don't have yet. Not a lot. It's not too dissimilar from labor. it's
not, is it? It's not, is it? So, but I mean, you're glossing over the fragility issue a little bit, because that's the thing that is not going to get better, and it is a thing that a lot of people who I don't think are being manipulated are citing. The case study that Reuters had, they just think he's, he turns 81 this month, so he is the same age as Mick Jagger, and he looks 100 years older.
He looks 100 years older than Mick Jagger?
Well, in his movements and his actions, maybe not in his cragginess.
Okay. Because I was going to say, I think he's probably a lot healthier than Mick Jagger.
Well, I doubt it. We can't see Joe Biden bouncing around on a stage with Keith Richards, but I've probably gone down a bit of a blind alley here. So let's read.
I don't know if Biden spent a lot of his youth on the Bolivian marching powder. So
no, okay. Well, I don't know that Mick Jagger did either, but he is.
Okay.
Well, no, stop it. Let's not stop it now.
Fair.
It's very rock and roll. So the fragility issue is an irreversible problem, Kat.
No, and that's true. But he has also chosen a very capable vice president, and he's made that entire...
Why is she not more front and centre?
Because she's a black woman.
So it's not her choice or his choice?
I think that there was a major kind of smear campaign happening for her. A lot of people have been... there's a lot of talk about pushing him to pick someone else. And it's that same kind of thing that happened with Hillary, which was, we don't mind having a woman, just not her. We don't mind having a black woman, just not her. Except it's always not her. You know what I mean?
Yeah, of course it is. Well, no, unless it's, Marjorie Taylor Greene or unless it's... I don't know. I can't think of an example. Well, exactly. So, or even Suella Braverman, I suppose. We're perfectly happy with a woman of colour as long as she endorses and inflames and inflates all of our prejudices. That would be the British equivalent. Thank you, Kat. Quick, I don't know if this is Idiot's Corner, but it is anti-Semitic, Joe, which is why I'm going to read it out. Why are you not talking about the siege on Gaza hospitals and forcing the people to move south? Have you been silenced? Which is, an implicit suggestion that the Jewish lobby, as Nigel Farage likes to call it when he's claiming that it has too much power or that it exercises a lot of power in America, would somehow be able to stop me talking about what I want to talk about. In this case, the situation in Gaza, which we've covered now for several weeks. But if you think that there are powers that silence me from talking about that, Joe, then you're anti-Semitic, unfortunately. But it's never too late to change, and it's sometimes helpful to have that pointed out by someone who hasn't drunk all of the Kool-Aid that you've consumed in recent years. But do try to do better. It's coming up to 12:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Paige has just told me that Joe Biden does spin classes, which is a sort of aerobics on bicycles. Yeah, okay, maybe he's not in any inferior physical condition to Mick Jagger. And just for the benefit of any lawyers listening, I'm categorically certain that Mick Jagger has never done anything even vaguely criminal in his entire life, except the things that he has, in fact, been arrested for. It's 12:30, and Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
12:34 is the time. I am keen to get a guest up on that news regarding the litigation being brought against the Daily Mail by Prince Harry and Baroness Lawrence and others. And we will before the end of the programme. But I just want to comment on one element of the Daily Mail's defence that it's worth probably having a little think about. They claim that it's an absolutely disgusting or utterly ridiculous selection of smears, but they've tried to have it thrown out of court because the allegations of what happened so long ago. So I just found that quite diverting. It's simultaneously utterly appalling smears, but also we don't want to go to court with it because the things that we're being accused of happened long ago. The Daily Mail says the claims are preposterous smears, denies the allegations, obviously, but in March they asked the judge to throw it out without trial because the challenges had been brought far too late. It's sort of interesting. 12:35 is the time. Back to Biden and the question. And a lot of also questions about the poll that I'm referring to, the New York Times poll that showed him behind Trump in several key swing states. It's not an outlier, and it might have overrepresented Well, it did overrepresent Republicans, whatever that means, because the poll has told us that it did. But there is clearly a disconnect between the popularity of the Democrats, particularly on the policy of repealing abortion legislation, sort of undoing the undoing of Roe versus Wade, and the leader of the party. And it perhaps comes down to a little more than fragility. Not least because Trump, I think, is 77 and he's having some very senior moments. Most recently when he was asked why he hadn't, or whether he'd been involved in assembling some financial documentation, and he replied that he couldn't have been involved in it at that time because he was in the White House busy dealing with China and Iran, at which point the lawyer pointed out that he wasn't actually president at the time. So unless he'd sort of trespassed or snuck into the White House and hidden himself in the toilet and started talking about China and Iran, he'd lost the ability to read a calendar at that point. Tom's in Leeds. Tom, what do you reckon?
Hi, James. If I start rambling, let me know.
As long as you do the same for me.
Yeah, no worries.
It's a bit late in my case, Tom, but carry on.
Yeah, so my fiance is a US citizen, and I was out in the US. I've just come back a couple of weeks ago. And for her, she's not really ever been that much into politics, and so on. And I've noticed this myself, there has been an increase in pricing in the cost of living. Now, it might not account for the whole of the US because there's so many states, and she's in Florida. So the cost of living in Florida is normally quite higher compared to some other states.
Yes.
But she basically just thinks, get rid of Biden, just purely down to her situation with...
And groceries would become cheaper.
Yeah, well, that's how she thinks.
No, fair enough. A lot of people do. In fact, there was Emily Maitlis's analysis earlier this week on this programme boiled down to that point. So it's a perfectly normal position, even though it's wrong.
Yeah, I mean, she's in, she dislikes a lot of the Republican policies, and would want to vote for Democrat, but I think what she sees as well, and from what we've spoken about when we've had this conversation, is a lot of the time what she sees on either social media or news where it's seeing Biden fall down the stairs, things like this, and it sort of comes across as a weakness, and that weakness is also portraying into how she's been able to survive,
I think that's probably true of more voters than it isn't true. How can you but look at your personal situation and wonder how responsible for it the person leading the country is? But there's an illogical element here as well that I suspect is very popular, which is the more fragile Biden looks, the easier it is to be persuaded or simply to persuade yourself that must be linked to the problems you've got or the suboptimal conditions of your own existence. If only he was a bit more on the ball, gas would be cheaper in America.
Yeah, and I think that's all it boils down to in her mind, and a lot of people that I speak to their mind when they see the cost of gas going up and they think it's crazy, it's ridiculous. It's nothing like our prices.
No, it's about 12p, isn't it? But if you say, and then of course, if you say that, well, it's a consequence, among other things, of the war in Ukraine, then Donald Trump pops up and says, well, we'll stop supporting the war in Ukraine. And it becomes a proper old pincer movement politically, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it's the mixture of that. And like I said, we're mentioning about, when they're seeing certain images and videos of Joe Biden, and then when they're seeing the opposition, I don't want to say it because you said you don't want to focus on that.
No, you can if you want. Of course you can.
But when they see the opposition sort of standing up against the attacks, it looks like one's stronger and one's weaker in her mindset.
And if she's struggling to pay her bills, it doesn't matter that the economy is going gangbusters, growing. I think for Gary Darlington tells me it's currently 4.6%, which compared to almost anyone in the first world is impressive.
Yeah, I mean, and I've got some figures here.
Very quickly, because I've got a guest waiting. Go on.
Yeah, no, of course. Basically, she's on above the average income in the US, but her total outgoings, and this is including childcare, is just under $5,000, which with just above average wage is not livable, and that's
she's struggling. Did you make this spreadsheet of her financial situation before you decided to propose to her, Tom, or
it's something that we've spoken about?
I'm teasing you. Of course you have, because you're going to have to start addressing these issues together very shortly. I wish you well with that and with everything. Tom, take care. Dr. Evan Harris is a former director of the Hacked Off campaign and is currently helping the claimants in the case that I referred to a moment ago, which has taken an interesting turn today with Prince Harry, Sir Elton John and Lady Doreen Lawrence, Baroness Lawrence amongst others, being given the green light to continue their legal case against the publisher of the Daily Mail. An attempt to have the case thrown out at the High Court has failed. David Furnish, Sadie Frost, Liz Hurley and Sir Simon Hughes also part of this legal action against Associated Newspapers Limited. Evan, how optimistic were you yesterday that this would be the result that the court delivered today?
Well, good morning. I always thought there was a good chance. I don't like to speculate and also comment on what I might have speculated against my own rules. But it was a big ask for the Mail Group Associated to try and strike out this, because they have to show that there's no real chance of the claimants being able to prove at trial that, on the balance of probabilities in a civil trial, that there was concealment of the wrongdoing that meant that they were delayed in bringing their claim. Because obviously, if articles are published in 2006, you normally say you've got 6 years to bring a claim.
Yes.
But all the phone hacking at the News of the World was brought long after that 6 years, because by definition, it's done secretly. They don't say the article doesn't say, and from the voicemail messages we listened to, we got this information. They pretend it's someone, a source or an insider.
Yes.
So generally speaking, it hasn't arisen before. But the Mail was saying that because of general allegations, these claimants should have known enough to have brought a claim, around the time of Leveson or thereafter. And the judge has said that he has, with no difficulty, he said, it wasn't a close call, in other words, rejected that argument. And so that will have to be determined at trial.
And that trial will look into allegations of illegal activity such as homes being bugged, deceptive tactics being used to obtain private medical information, and the tapping of live phone calls. Do we have any idea when it is likely to be in court?
Well, as you say, it's not just phone hacking, and the court case, when it comes, will determine whether that happened and also whether there was the concealment that means that they're entitled to bring it this late. Well, in normal litigation, this would be next year. But this sort of litigation with this particular defendant, who is well-resourced and very aggressive, one can expect, and I've no inside information on this, one can expect further what are called interlocutory applications, sort of satellite litigation, and therefore it may be delayed beyond next year. So we'll see. There's going to be a hearing in a couple of weeks by the judge to set what are called the directions, the timetable, the deadlines for the next stages, which include when Associated have to produce a defence, which they haven't done yet, and then when they have to disclose documents. Both sides need to disclose relevant documents, and those will, of course, be very interesting if they still exist.
Yes, indeed. I should stress that the Daily Mail insists, the Daily Mail, which has just failed in its attempt to have the case thrown out because the legal challenges have been brought far too late, also insists that the claims are all preposterous smears and has denied the allegations. I suspect you won't answer this, and I fully respect that. But why are they doing it? What is, because previously a lot of people bringing cases have not been able to go further because of a curious wrinkle in legislation that means if an offer is made, I'm not explaining this to you, Evan, I'm explaining it to people listening. If you turn down an offer made and press on and win, and whatever award you're made is less than the offer you turned down, you become liable for all the costs, and very, very few individuals would be capable of absorbing that, given the sheer scale of the legal juggernaut brought to court. So it is significant, I suspect, that these 6-7 people between them have very deep pockets.
Well, there's two things to say. Firstly, you're right. The costs, if you don't beat an offer, then the costs take up all your damages and more, and the costs are eye-watering.
Sienna Miller's case is perhaps the best to study in that context.
Indeed, but it's happened in every. Now, why might this not happen in this?
Yes.
I'm not giving away any trade secrets to say that in order for that situation to occur, the group concerned has to be willing to make an offer, and it's tantamount to an admission, I would say, when they do that.
They would deny that. They would deny that.
Yes, news groups say we admit the news of the world, we deny the Sun, but here's some money. Even in Sienna Miller's case, when she was only suing on the Sun. But the strength of the denials from Associated are so strong, from mendacious smears they accused Hugh Grant of in the Leveson inquiry to this preposterous claim now, that I don't see how they could, again, I've got no inside information, turn around and say, well, here's some money to go away. So in order for that rule to apply, to deny your time in court because you can't afford the risk of winning but losing on the costs, they have to have made a good offer. And it doesn't look like, this point, that they're going to do that. And so it looks like this is heading to court more inexorably than News Group and Mirror Group, where from the very beginning they made offers.
And there are still other cases outstanding with those groups as well.
And it still goes on. There's one interesting point, though.
Yes, of course.
They said it's preposterous, right? But what's interesting is that they didn't try and strike it out or have a summary judgment on the grounds of merits, because you're entitled to say, even at your highest case, without us having to do a defence, you can't win this. We want a summary judgment by the judge to kick it out at this point to save everyone and the court's time. They didn't even make that application, which suggests, again, I don't know, that they were advised that they couldn't win that. So their statements about preposterousness appear to me, and I think should appear to other people, to be spin and bluster.
Finally, Evan Harris, forgive me. I bet that happens a lot, doesn't it?
Yes. Poor sod.
Finally, Evan Harris. I presume that the likes of Prince Harry and Sir Elton John and, for rather different reasons, Lady Doreen Lawrence are not doing this in the hope of a financial settlement, chiefly.
No, I've never spoken to them about that, and I haven't spoken to them this morning, but Prince Harry's made clear that he wants the truth to come out. And Hugh Grant, who obviously is associated with some of these people, said in a statement today that this judgment is good news for those who want the truth to come out. And obviously, if the Daily Mail are innocent, then that will also be made clear, and that will be in their interests, of course, as well.
Dr. Evan Harris, former director of the Hacked Off campaign, which, of course, Hugh Grant is very much an active member of, and Evan now helping the claimants in this case. Many thanks indeed. This is big, this story, potentially, but given, and I don't need to explain it to you, or go on one of my regular tirades against the state of our print media, you're unlikely to read about it in many places in a way that conveys just how potentially big a deal it is. But that's why we're here. 12:48 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
12:52 is the time, and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'm in St Andrews tomorrow night. You know, I think there are some tickets left for it's not part of the full-on tour, but I think it's the only date that I'm doing for the new book where there are still a few tickets available. And the reason for that is that they've moved it at relatively late notice to a bigger venue than the one that we originally had booked. But it's with Toppings Books in St Andrews, if you fancy. In the highly unlikely event that 15 hours a week of me plus the Full Disclosure podcast is not more than enough. And frankly, I can't imagine that it isn't. Then we could see each other tomorrow night in St Andrews via the Toppings Bookshop website. I think there's a few tickets left. Anyway, speaking of the Full Disclosure podcast, I really loved this week's guest, and I didn't know as much about him as I do about some Full Disclosure guests that we've had in the past. It varies. Sometimes I know loads, sometimes I don't know much. All I know is that I like them and I want to spend an hour with them. You'd think that was a remarkable criteria for an interview series, wouldn't you? But in fact, it's the most logical. I'll interview people I don't like in the day job when I'm doing this, but if I'm going to sit down for an hour with someone and hopefully have a really enjoyable conversation, I work on the premise and the presumption that we're going to get on really well. And in the case of the comedian and increasingly actor Chris McCausland, my hopes were fully realised. This is a really lovely one. And as often with comedian interviews. It goes a little bit deeper than you might expect, but the smiles and the laughter are guaranteed.
People get into stand-up for a lot of reasons, and actors can get into stand-up because they want to create their own work and open doors that maybe they're not opening as an actor. People can get into stand-up because there's something about them that they're used to being funny about. So, somebody with a disability thinking, well, I'm used to making jokes about my disability or my weight or whatever, so I'm going to go out there and do that, but without that love of stand-up being the backbone of it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Whereas for me, it was the love of stand-up that ultimately
in and of itself
got me into it. Yeah.
When did you knock the day job on the head then? Because things worked. It's not exactly an overnight success, which I have seen you occasionally describe that. It's as you've just pinned down. It's a 20-year career.
Yeah.
Which has gone into overdrive in the last few years. But when did you have the confidence to knock the day job on the head?
2 years, which seems, is really quite quick for the open mic circuit.
Yeah.
But 20 years ago, I suppose a lot fewer people doing it than there are now.
Yeah.
I was motivated in terms of the number of gigs I did. It was, going from not being able to get a job and being employed to working in a call centre. The job was, the people were great. The job was, mind-numbing. And then to find this thing that was exhilarating and adrenaline fuel pumping and this new group of social group and this new hobby, I did 5 nights a week and just hammered it. And it became this thing that I got good at.
And
quite
you get
quickly.
better. The more you do, the better you get.
Yeah. And I didn't do it to talk about being blind.
No, of course.
So I barely mentioned it, and I'd maybe do 2 jokes, one at the beginning, and I might drop a little joke in somewhere along the way. But I wanted to be Eddie Izzard, and not from the point of view of the, I wasn't doing it. You stab him. I was, but the variety.
I understand.
It was the variety of material
and the surprise
and the bashing the preconceptions over the head that I knew that going on stage people would expect it to be all blind jokes, like I expected Eddie to be all kind of camp comedy. And I wanted to do that same thing of not give them that at all, and that's what I did. Barely mentioned it, and I'd stuff about sharks and giraffes and things like that, bomb disposal and all this kind of stuff. And looking back, I realised looking back that was my driving force at the time, but also I think I probably wanted to make myself forget a little bit as well. Okay. Not just make the audience forget, but also I don't think when you're in your 20s, you're not. And you've lost your sight very, very gradually. You're a different animal to someone who's always been blind,
right?
And you go through this huge period of denial and resistance and hatred of the things that define you as a blind person. Whether that's using a white stick, all these kinds of things. These identifiers you shun, and ultimately it makes you quite maladjusted in terms of. I'm sure. And so getting into stand up, I think looking back, that part of it was that as well. It was I'm gonna challenge these preconceptions, make people forget, but also be normal. It's that normal word again, isn't it? You know.
Yeah. It is 12:58, very nearly, and Chris McCausland there, wonderful guest on Full Disclosure, referring to Eddie Izzard, who has also been a wonderful guest on Full Disclosure. So if that is not reason enough to check out the back catalogue, then I don't know what is. Dorothy is in Westward Ho and has called me before about American politics, so I know that when I tell her that she can only have 49.3 seconds to give me the lowdown on Joe Biden, she will respect the limitations. Dorothy, over to you.
Always respecting limitations. I think it's part of the age and the perceived fragility is an issue, but I think it's partly because of how unpopular Kamala Harris is, his vice president, because there are people who are afraid that if he would have to step aside, that whether it's justified or not, her unpopularity would be an issue. And I actually think that it might actually be an issue with why he maybe hasn't stepped aside and let somebody else run, is because normally the vice president then steps up to become the front runner in the following election.
And that is the I mean the count. It's not even a counterfactual. It's the what if, isn't it? Thank you, Dorothy, and thank you also for respecting the very unfair and brutal time limitations that I imposed upon you. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and even rewind live radio. You'll also find all of LBC's shows to catch up on, as well as the world's biggest podcasts, including Full Disclosure. Pause and rewind live radio on Global Player, where you're always in control. Download for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. I might see you in Edinburgh tonight or St Andrews tomorrow. Otherwise, coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick. But now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.